at ya, at ya. Tell you what's master, coming at ya, coming at ya. Rhyme style disaster, coming at ya, at ya. Tell you what's master.
Hello and welcome to Cut the Bull. I am Charles Love alongside my co-host, Brooks Crenshaw, Christy Kelly, Wilfred Reilly, and our guest this week, single week, is Natalya Murakhver. She is with Restored Childhood, which we will talk about later. But the reason we brought her on was to talk about, she has many skills, and one of the many is a fabulous filmmaker. And we're going to talk about a couple of those. Another one she has coming down the pike. But here we're going to start off talking about 15 Days, her film about this little thing that happened 5 or 6 years ago. You may not remember. It was a virus going around and half the world was supposedly going to be annihilated, and it didn't happen. And so she made this documentary about what that did to the kids. Natalya, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
Well, thank you for coming and to discuss such a lighthearted, fun topic. So, the film, what drove you to make this film? I know you make others. You always wanted to be this budding filmmaker, but why did you think it was important to tell this story about the 15 days? Obviously, I'm guessing, I don't know much about the naming films, but I guess you want to get a catch of something people would understand and remember. I think it has something to do with slowing a spread.
Exactly. Slow the
Mm,
spread or flatten the curve.
Flatten the curve, all those little cool, you
An
can make
abundance of
that do
caution,
nothing.
could be that. David Zweig named his book An Abundance of Caution. It's all
Right,
the same thing. It's propaganda, right? Like none of it was
right.
true.
You gave away the movie now. No, none of it was true. But why did you think it's important to highlight the fact that none of it was true?
Well, first of all, I had access to these amazing families and doctors and, reporters around the country because about 5.5 years ago, parents came together in different cities around the country. I was here in New York City, and I went to the very first open schools rally and met a few like-minded parents, many of whom you know, and we still remain friends with to this day. We didn't meet particularly well that day because now that I look back at it, we were all wearing masks outside in downtown Manhattan in November 2020. But we all came together because we realized, even as early as November 2020, that school closures were not scientific, they were not evidence-based, that they were politically driven, and that our children were going to suffer. We just couldn't, stop this horrible avalanche. And so, I had access to these incredible families. The press, at least the mainstream press, wasn't interested in covering these stories. So if I didn't do it, who would?
Hmm. I like that, quick and simple. Um, Before you get into the movie, I mean, we kind of know the topic, of course, but who should I'm going to call on someone. Um, we went back briefly a little bit and talked about all these stories that we talked about over the years when we did our 200th episode. We recorded that last week, and this was one of the topics we talked about. So, how about everybody kind of take us back briefly to the key point during the pandemic that stands out to them, either whether it was early on or when you first realized that, the 15 days to flatten the curve or slow the spread wasn't true, or when you thought that the government was really finding a way that they can control people, and this was not going to be good in other situations going forward. Christy, how about you go first? What is the
Yeah, we did
15 days put in mind for you?
we did talk about this a little bit
Hmm.
last week, and I'm from California, basically from California, but the year before COVID, we had moved to Mississippi. And as soon as I got to Mississippi, I
Right.
started basically, homeschooling my kids pretty immediately. They spent a little bit in public school, but pretty immediately just because schools were so horrible down there compared to California. So I feel like we were being positioned already for COVID, and we fared a lot better than some of the poor kids in Natalya's movie because we were already kind of in a homeschool community. But at the time, my husband and I were running a gym, so we did have to shut the gym. But like I said, we would open up the back door and, we would go work out or maybe let, a few people in. Mississippi probably really did only shut down for those maybe 2 weeks. And then after a month, the people in the South just weren't having it. I mean, they were just, like, we're not having this. We're done. We're done with the mask. We're done with everything. But I think the biggest thing it really taught me is, really early on, my husband, he was just like, this COVID stuff is a hoax and we're not having anything to do with the shot. And I'm grateful that he saw that because I probably maybe would have been fooled by it because there was so much pressure, right, on
Mhm.
everyone. And it really did feel like, oh my gosh, and this, panic set in. But
Mhm.
I'm glad we were in Mississippi and not California. Thank God.
Right. And to the Kentucky contingent, the what I like to call the North South. What about you all? What was the biggest thing that stood out from the COVID period for you, Will and Brooks?
I,
Will.
I guess I could take that. I mean, the thing that stood out for me, first of all, so one bluntly, like Christy said, most people in Kentucky just didn't obey the quote unquote COVID rules. I didn't, and I would encourage people if the government tries something like this again, not to. We tried not to put seniors at risk. I mean, in fact, in the neighborhood Jane and I lived in at the time, a lot of the younger men would shop for older ladies and gents on the block, that kind of thing. But beyond that, I mean, you're a citizen. You obviously have a right to go outside, walk, and drive your car, and so on. And the idea that you suddenly didn't struck most people as absurd. And there's nothing wrong with valuing yourself and your wife's mental health and so on, at least as much as you value the needs of total and often hostile strangers. And I think that's a conservative response to almost everything the left says. Like, why don't you want to feed hungry kids? Well, I do. I tithe, I do all of that. But one reason is that I don't want to give all of my money to people I don't know who often don't like me. And that's a really legitimate response. And you have to decide where exactly that line is going to be drawn. But anyway, one of the things about this is that in areas where people have real jobs, I mean, I live in the state capital, but Brooks lives actually in a little more of a rural area. Most people have essential jobs. I mean, they're working in the building trades. I mean, if you have a white collar job, it's like teacher, which is what I am. I mean, everyone was going outside, and I guess getting to the point, you realize nobody's dying. You go to the grocery store, everybody's alive. We had friends that lived in like downtown Louisville, for example, that were locked down. They had the same rate of death as everyone else, or a little higher, because they were in dusty environments where the virus was actually thriving. And you start to see, well, what we're hearing doesn't make a lot of sense. And that for me was the thing that struck me first. Like, this is real. Like, I don't think COVID's a hoax. I knew people that got very sick, although no one that died. But the framing is just not accurate. I wrote an article very early on for Spiked, the UK men's magazine, where I compared the southern states that were doing what we were doing, imperfect but free, with the northern states, which with New York and Chicago and Detroit and so on. And I found that the northern states had a way higher rate of death. So I guess that was it for me. Like, just looking around and realizing that what we were hearing didn't match reality at all. Like, most people had essential jobs, and you just go to the store, and every day it was the same people there, and they were all living. And those few people that unfortunately did die were all really old. And people started picking that up early on, where like the matriarchs and families were like, be safe around older people. And that didn't seem to hit the mainstream until quite a bit later. And last thing, that's true with everything, by the way. There's this desire to kind of avoid stigma or this feeling that normal people can't be trusted, right? So just obvious shit isn't said, like monkeypox is a disease mostly spread by gay anal sex. But it's very awkward to say that. So there's this whole thing about like mpox, we must protect our children. Like, children shouldn't have this disease at all. Like, if that happens, there's a real problem. But the whole framing about it is very, very different from what would actually stop, 99% of the problem. And that's what I saw early on with COVID. It was the same kind of thing. You realize everyone's alive. There's another way to do this.
And
it is definitely awkward to say that, but we can always count on you to say it.
if anybody can say it.
Yes. So
Like what, like the monkeypox analogy, or
right. So when Will was talking about downtown Louisville, my wife and I were actually living in downtown Louisville during COVID. And it was a good place to live. We were in a nice high-rise community. From a business standpoint, it was wonderful because you could have business meetings in the restaurant or the coffee shop, on the first floor, and then get in the elevator and go back up to your place. So it was a very central place of business that was very convenient. But once COVID started, we were in a filing cabinet, and it was, as Will said, locked down. The first couple of weeks, we did what most people did, which was, we masked up, particularly when we were going to places where they had the signs, and we binged a lot of Netflix. And then, in about a month, I started to see, okay, that the data that's coming in, and like Will said, what we're being told and what is actually happening is not, it's not on par. I had been in Vegas in January, and when we first heard about COVID, I was in Vegas during a very busy time. There were 3 major conventions, and my wife was at one convention for bath and kitchen, and I was at the SHOT Show for guns and military stuff. And there was another large convention, and it was very crowded, and the news is saying, hey, pandemic imminent, it's coming. And we're like, okay. So we fly back, and we're all paranoid that we've got the thing that's going to kill everybody, right? And yeah, I noticed on social very quickly when I started to do some data visualizations that kind of showed the model projection and the actual data coming in and how disparate they were, and what that likely meant. It was like being in the Ash experiment. It was like people were very reactive to anything that wasn't the main narrative. And I noticed that was really the first time I noticed in mass that there was this, reactive, reflexive, what would you say? Hostile response to anything that was outside the narrative. So, I'd seen a little bit of it with some early woke, but COVID really kicked that into high gear. We stayed there until the riots. And so when the riots happened in the middle of COVID, that's where a lot of people really kind of woke up, because, we're being told, 10 at a time at the family function outside, and then, but rioting is patriotic and there's no COVID there. And that first riot kicked off, and we ended up living here. We closed on a house in about 32 days, nice farmhouse on 5 acres. So, yeah, that was Louisville. And I still have a lot of, that really shaped my conversation with public, right? That really made me very low tolerant of bullshit. Because having
if I could say one thing quickly,
yeah.
there, like one of the things Brooks is getting into actually is like the distrust of experts that came out of this also.
Yes.
Where like when we look at the guest, all these smart, normal people were looking at the things like the big brains, which unfortunately includes my profession, were saying and just saying, wow, this is bullshit. So like when you talk about the reaction to the narrative, those are 2 specific papers, right? Like Neil Ferguson and I think Tom Pueo, the tech CEO, who made these predictions, like 10 million people are going to die in like time frame X unless we do Y. This was very specific. It was like the hammer and the dance. This was on all media. Niall Ferguson said only 2 million, but I think that was with all his protections in place. So there was this hysteria going on in the background, like this is going to be the rage virus from the video games. And people were believing this. And if you said, no, it's not, you can just walk down the street and see what's happening. There was anger in response to that. Like, are you trying to kill my grandmother? I still remember people saying. So that was a huge part of all that. And the Brooks, I mean, you kind of mentioned last thing, but the one thing that broke the spell, which was like the 4,000 doctors or whatever the number was for the guys in the comments, but signing that letter that was like the real pandemic is racism. Like, I still remember reading this horse shit in Newsweek, and they're like, yeah, George Floyd protests are unlikely to spread COVID. And they specifically in that said that other protests would spread COVID. Like, it was just straight up like East European, West African, like
Yeah.
magic. Like, if you go to a lockdown, if you go to a lockdown protest, you'll spread COVID. But a riot, that's fine. And I think that a lot of people started just, making the woo-woo noise in their heads and thinking for themselves again.
Yeah. Well, so one other quick anecdote. After
Define quick. I can't.
Well, so during in the lead up to the vax period, in the lead up to the vax mandate, as we're hearing that a vaccine is coming, I just had a surgery on my arm, and so I was going regularly to get follow up and PT on the arm itself, and so I was talking to nurses because I'm curious, and I'm like, hey, so what have you heard about this vaccine? Like, we're getting this out in under a year. Like, that's certainly outside of protocol and norms. Like, this seems rushed. Like, are you concerned about that? And are you going to take this thing when it comes out? And I'd be with one nurse in the room in private, and they'd be like, we might have to, but I don't want to. Right. Because like they know what goes into making these things and how long it takes and what the risks are and what type of testing protocol should be in place in order to do that before you roll it out across a mandatory period, a mandatory population of millions. That was a second ratchet for me in that process of, yeah, I'm not listening to these bastards.
So Natalya, obviously there were lots of problems with vaccine, COVID, the handling of keeping people safe and the spread, but you focus primarily on kids who probably had some of the biggest harm because there's developmental issues based on their age. They're keeping up with grade, their sports. You in your movie, you talk to families with kids of all different ages. So you highlight very well how it didn't really matter where they fell. If they were trying to get into college and play sport, if they were trying to get into a good college academically, if they were trying to get to a specialized high school, or if they were just starting school, it was different, but it all affected them in a really, really negative way. And in addition to that, people seem to dismiss those problems and the fact, as Will and Brooks were saying, that the data said that the young kids were least likely to get sick, but they were basically shutting everything down. So talk about that in the families, and eventually, obviously, we need to talk about the teachers' unions and how strong they are and how they had such a strong role in how the politicians set their policy.
Yeah, I mean, that's we didn't really understand what role the teachers' unions were playing till much later. I think many of us were on the same page as you guys were when things first happened. We were not sure. We were trying to get our bearings. We were constantly being sold this diet of fear and distrust of everyone. It really, like, social isolation is torture. None of us should be doing it, and certainly not children. But our research, and my experience just speaking to children and families from across, different races, ages, social strata, is that nobody was unaffected. It was so easy for these pundits to use words like resilient. I mean, they had this like lexicon that they had developed, like the teachers' unions. If you analyze the kinds of things Randy Weingarten, Becky Pringle, like Cecily Meyer Cruz of UTLA said, they were all the same things. Like, the kids are resilient. I think at one point Cecily Meyer Cruz in LA Magazine said, it doesn't matter if our babies haven't learned the times tables. They know the difference between a riot and a coup. I mean, they were telling us what they were doing right then and there, right? And children were absolutely shattered. We talked to a young athlete here in New York City, Bam Garrett Morgan, who I have kept up with. He's just turned 21, and he's a student body president at Long Island Community College, but he had much grander ambitions. He was at a Queens high school. He was successful there in becoming the student body president there. He was on the football team. He already had a weight problem. When school shut down, he didn't get to play sports for a year, and he gained an incredible amount of weight, which I think he's still struggling to lose. But he never got scouted for a college scholarship, like a sports scholarship. So as a result, he ended up taking a gap year, going to a military academy, still not being able to restart his sports career, and going to a community college. Now, he's going to be fine. He's got a great family, very supportive structure. He's a smart, self-driven, very articulate young man. But as he and others we spoke with say, there are kids they went to school with who never came back after schools reopened. And so these are just the stories we're able to share. There are many stories that we can't share because we don't know what happened to them.
Well, one thing is good. You say that kid has a strong family. He also has the benefit of having created the stoplight. And then you said Garrett Morgan, right? I'm sorry.
Yeah.
People look that up and get what I'm talking about. But the real odd piece is that you said that these teacher union people kept saying that the kids were resilient. And I wonder if anyone ever asked them if the kids are so resilient, so they don't need to, know the times table or alphabets, all this kind of stuff. They were resilient. They could sit at home and not really learn and watch Zoom and watch cartoons because they're resilient. But they weren't resilient enough to, see something in a book, in a history book, and read a math problem with a kid who has 3 marbles' name isn't Jamal. They're not that resilient, right? They're not culturally responsive, resilient, right? They can't learn unless they have these certain
Right.
things and
Right.
the gender stuff in school. So it's weird because they get away with it because what they say doesn't make sense and they don't even believe it. But they get on the same page and they repeat it and no one says anything. So but to what Christy, Will, and Brooks said, they were all in slightly different scenarios. I mean, Louisville was a little bit closer to ours, but none of them, were where we were. I remember, I'm sure I've mentioned it in passing because it's come up in times before, but I'm in New York City, obviously. I moved to New York 5 or 6 weeks before COVID. So I was brand new, still in boxes, whatever. And this hit and it was crazy. And so, it's COVID supposedly like the first case was where like Washington State, I believe, but then New York, Westchester and then New York City became ground zero for like a month. Everybody, so I'm still, I just moved from Chicago. So everybody in my family, all my friends are calling me every day, freaking out, like, oh my God. Like I had someone scold me because I let my son, he was learning how to ride a bike. And I was letting him go out, on the streets and learn how to ride a bike. And they were like, how could you be outside? You sent the video, he's not wearing a mask. And I was like, well, first of all, he's outside. But I'm like, did you look at it? You do realize where I live. You looked at the video, right? I'm in Midtown. And there's no one on the street in the video but him. It's insanity. I mean, the streets were empty. He could go down the street for 2 or 3 blocks and be the only person on the street, right? So some of this stuff was just, we didn't know, like you said, we didn't know how bad the virus was. But at the same time, what they were telling us to do just didn't make sense. And Will and I joke, Will likes, we look at data and talk about studies all the time. And I always like to joke how some things is just so I don't need a study. The study's just,
Right.
Confirming my common sense, right? I can see, I have my eyes and I can see. So we had that, but we had the riots, we had the curfew, we had, I talked about my birthday being in June and having to do what did I have to do? I had to do like a walking restaurant tour because you couldn't go into the restaurant. And we had a curfew at the time. It was June of 2020. So we had a curfew. So I, a grown man, had to be in the house by 8 p.m., right? But then I would get into the building and then watch people go through the streets, breaking windows. And then they all culminated. They walked across the bridge into Brooklyn and went to the Barclays Center, and it was like thousands of people outside. And like Will said, you couldn't catch COVID at the protest. But all that stuff said, we fast forward through that. But the bigger problem is, like you said, is specifically in the movie, you're talking about the impact on the kids. You're talking about the 15 days was a lie. You're talking about the teachers and the teachers union's impact and how they just refuse to go back. But one other thing I want to talk about, I know, and I'm not giving him that much credit. I'm not saying he did a great job, but I am being fair to relate it to. So if you compare it to Indiana, Mississippi, Georgia, and everything, terrible job. But being in New York, you have to kind of compare it to say, what is Chicago, LA, DC, and all these other cities doing? So good old Eric Adams, who they ran out, who got 4 votes and had to drop out. Correct me if I'm wrong. I'm sure you're harder on him than I am. Which I am, but I get it. But as my memory serves, he got sworn in New Year's at the time. He ran on whatever liberal, dance at the library, drag queen nonsense. But he also said that he wanted to open the schools and he was going to remove the homeless people from the subway. So the first thing he did, he got sworn in after the balls dropped. And then the next day, I remember protesters protesting because he swept the trains and took all the homeless people out of the train. I was like, oh, so he actually did something he was going to do. And I moved on.
Right.
But then to the schools, we went to school, and you have a kid the same age as my son. You have 2 though, so I know it's different. Like you said, it affects kids differently. I think it was bad for all kids, but I think that age, your younger kid, was the best age at the time because wow, Will keeps dropping because he was in preschool when the schools closed. By the fall, I think they started like 2 weeks late here in New York, so they didn't go back to early October, and they were hybrid, which was a joke. For the rest of the year. You had the Christmas break. They came back in January. They were like 3 days, I think, for a couple weeks. And then they went to school. He was in class every day, right? Math, all that kind of nonsense. But he was in class. They had some weird program, if you test positive, kids or whatever. But he was in class. I look at Chicago and San Francisco, like we had Jennifer Stay on, and they didn't go back to school for like 6 months after Chicago, who went back a year after us. So they didn't touch, there was no hybrid for all of 21 until the end of 21.
Right. The CTU was really, really
Yeah,
bad.
it was insane.
But
So
Lori Lightfoot did fight. She did try to I mean, with all her
yeah,
flaws,
she
she
did, right?
did take
She
them
lost.
on. She lost, but she tried, right?
Yeah,
I
she
was
tried. And San Francisco
Adam,
was worse.
yeah, San Francisco was worse. But again, like the mayor there was actually trying. It wasn't the
Yeah,
mayor.
she did.
It was like
Mhm.
the school boards and all of that. I mean, they were, remember San Francisco was renaming schools while they were still closed. Do you
Oh yeah.
remember?
Oh yeah,
Gotta
I
have
forgot about that.
priorities.
But see, that's my thing. It's like I'm not giving New York a pass, the teachers union, or even Eric Adams. But a lot of the talk was right, left, blue and red states.
Yeah.
But even in those, you're talking 6 to 8 months between what New York did and what San Francisco did. Both liberal towns with leftist mayors,
Right.
right? And with Chicago in the middle, and that made a huge difference, I think, for my son because he was in class for those periods of time. Be it hybrid for a little while. I think by February they were in 5 days a week.
Yeah, by March.
They
But
were in 5 days a week while Chicago was still 100% at home.
unions. I'm sorry, but as much as I'd love to give Eric Adams the credit for this,
I'm not trying.
no, but it
Everybody
wasn't
takes
their,
what I'm saying and is like,
but no, but what I'm saying, it wasn't Adams, it was de Blasio. That's what I'm trying to tell you. As awful as de Blasio was, because I sued him, I organized a lawsuit to reopen the schools.
for De Blasio.
De Blasio.
De Blasio.
Adams was not mayor yet. Adams
Right.
had to deal with the whole masking and the toddler masking.
Right.
Adams
Yeah.
Adams was always on our side. He
Yeah,
was the
yeah.
Brooklyn Borough president, and he showed
Yeah.
up at most of our rallies. I invited him to the very first rally, and he showed
Mhm.
up. And he actually stood up for the kids, and he stood up for sports. He did
Right.
speak out. He was the only one.
Right.
It was de Blasio.
Oh,
So
yeah, De
you
Blasio
you sued Wilhelm?
I love the Wilhelm. Oh yeah,
I did. I organized a lawsuit against de Blasio. Yes, because they still had Zoom in a room in the spring of 2021. So many parents around the country couldn't even find attorneys that would take on these cases because many of the attorneys are very far left, and these law firms just won't even entertain these open schools cases. But I ended up, as Charles knows, I'm extremely persuasive, and I make a lot of phone calls. And so I found a lawyer in Long Island. His name was Jim Mermiguez, and he'd sued Cuomo successfully to reopen strip clubs, sports bars, restaurants, etc. And I asked him to take this case on, and he ignored me until I finally sent him a message. I said, "Do you know that middle and high schoolers are Zooming in a room?" And he was like, "What the hell are you talking about? What does that mean?" And I said, "Well, they're in the schools.
They're in the
They're
school.
looking in the laptops.
Teachers
They've
are
got
not.
their masks on. They're separated. The teachers are not in the
At
school.
home.
They're teaching." And he
Look
was
at
like,
Christy. Christy didn't know that. Yeah, so the teachers at home because the teachers refuse to go into the classroom unless they spend $18 million, I make up a number, to redo the whole HVAC system in the school to make sure it was completely
I think
Oh,
one thing a
wow.
lot of people don't understand is that a lot of these union government jobs did this for years, and some of them are still doing it. Like a buddy of mine, Daryl Pinto, veteran, does some stuff with Veterans Affairs. His wife's an accountant for like the Kentucky teachers retirement system or whatever. They're still right now working 2 days a week. And they have some kind of legal case going on where they want to redesign the air filters in all of their buildings, and they claim they're at serious risk. Like this is 2025. So if
yeah.
you're looking at like these union government positions, this hasn't stopped yet. Like
We
there
we
are
have a
offices full of people that are still there like 2 or 3 days weekly. What's going on, Brooks?
we have a saying in Kentucky. It's worthless as tits on a bull. And that's what
I know
most of
that
these
one.
that's what most of these bureaucrats and public sector people are. And I say
I
that
have
as
to.
I say that as someone who has been in the system and worked with them.
Well,
Right.
well, bureaucracy
I,
is just an amazing thing. Like Brooks, did I ever tell you the Tennessee Valley Authority story?
oh my God.
No, but I've got some experience with them. Go.
Okay, like 10-second story. I went with my buddy LG, whatever. He used to teach at my university to a golf scramble. And one of the guys in one of the foursomes works for a government agency called the TVA, the Tennessee Valley Authority. And we're all just talking, we're all just bullshit. And I said, the Tennessee Valley Authority, didn't you guys electrify the South? Like, are you still around? And he said, well, yeah, we don't, government agencies don't go anywhere. Like we don't do much these days, but the budget's still $12 billion a year or whatever
Wow.
it is. So the issue isn't just that laws get passed, it's that when laws get passed, they don't really ever come off the books. I mean, and that we just saw that with whatever your position is on abortion. We saw that with Dobbs v. Jackson, right? When you reverse Roe v. Wade, all the states went back to this mishmash of abortion laws they had in 1970 because none of that was ever removed, none of that was ever rewritten because that's not what happens with the law. You just have those tomes that you see in every lawyer's office, and that's what the parents are fighting against with a lot of this stuff.
I think we had a recent podcast on libertarianism, and I talked about that. I said, well, just give me the laws that we actually are going to enforce instead of deciding when what laws you want to enforce or not to enforce. It's because you have this bucket of thousands of laws you can go back to. It's like Trump used this archaic 1797 law and they get mad, but then they use archaic laws all the time. We're pretty good at getting off on a tangent, but I got to mention that because it was so good. So Brooks said something about Wilhelm. And so again, Natalya, not giving anyone a pass, but I just like to put the facts out there. When Mamdani was obvious, so we were together on election day, but before that, when he was looking like it was obvious he was going to win, and I'm like, I don't want him to win. Not giving him a pass. He's a socialist. He's bad. However, I was like, I'm watching. So in New York, the weird thing about me being more, center right, I mean, I'm not a Republican, but I'm a conservative, is that most of the people that I meet and most of the people, Natalya and all the others, and I'm assuming it includes her. I don't think I've ever asked her. The people that activists and that I meet and that are doing these things, whether it's parents, whether it's the gender thing, they're all Democrats. I don't meet any Republicans here. They're all Democrats who just got fed up with something that one of the 9 crazy things the left is doing. So when Mamdani was certain, they were freaking out, right? These are Democrats. Oh my God, we gotta have a social, whatever. And I just turned to them and I was like, are you worried? And I just turned and I was like, I don't want them, but you all acted like you didn't already have a socialist mayor. They're like, what do you mean? I mean, de Blasio, he's literally a socialist, right? He was in the party. He was a card carrying. I mean, you couldn't get more socialist. And it's funny that you mentioned that. That's his real name. Go look. It's literally like Von something too, isn't it? I don't remember the full name.
It's Wilhelm von. Yeah, I'll look.
Yeah. So go back and watch our podcast with Seth Barron. He's a journalist here in New York, and he wrote a book called The Last Days of New York, and it's about him and his rise to power and his whole family. And he's basically Mamdani without the anti-Semitism.
Warren Wilhelm Jr.
Yes, all of the other policies are the same. So it's not like they haven't had it. And he was a two-term president. I mean, two-term mayor. So not that this would be better, but you know, it is what it is. But
Well, he participated in one of the biggest IQ tests I've ever seen as a mayor who was protesting a police department. It's like you do realize who runs the police department, right? The police
is it the
department
mayor?
answers
Is it the
to
mayor?
the mayor. Yeah, yeah. I said this in
Well,
class.
well, to be fair, we've gone from that to the mayor who openly hates police and thinks they shouldn't exist.
Right.
So then there's that. But you know, I digress. Um, Christy, what are you shocked about what the talent, anything that you saw in the film, or just how bad it was for the people sitting down? Like, so you didn't have the situation, you were homeschooled, whatever. So I'll give you one more example, since Natalia told you about how they were Zooming in schools because the teachers didn't come in. So, like I said, my kid at the time he was really in fifth grade because school had started in the fall. So my son was in, kindergarten. He was 5 years old. He was in kindergarten, and they had to go to school, so they would do attendance, this virtual attendance, and then the teachers were the teachers in class at the time. No, the teachers were at home at the time for sure, right? So teachers are at home, kids are at home, they're doing school, and the teachers would put on. What's the videos, Natalia? I forgot. It was like these
Zoom?
education videos where they no, it was the
Oh,
video where
epic,
they
epic,
sang.
epic video, epic
It was
like
something where they
reading.
sang. It was literal. It wasn't even fake Zoom school. It was just like Barney. They would just put Barney on. If I because I can't think of a better term. They put Barney on, and the kindergarten kids would just watch this and leave the room or do whatever, move a mouse. So, what do you think about that, Christy? And then I have another really important question that's really going to get everybody fired up. But I want to know what your thoughts are being so separated from it.
Yeah, I mean, I was separated from it, but most
Yeah.
of my family lives, in Ohio. So, and I also wanted to say up front that I'm not one of the people that's like COVID was fake because as you guys know, I caught bronchitis last month and was literally sick for a whole month with bronchitis. So
Mhm.
of course I caught COVID. Like I stopped counting how many times. I think I caught it 3 times, and after the third time I stopped counting. But the first time, like I literally thought I was gonna die. Like it was bad the first time. And then the second time wasn't so bad. And the third time it was like, whatever. That's just how COVID
After you
works.
got the shot.
No, I never got the shot. I would be
I knew
divorced if
the
I
answer to
got the
that when I say
shot.
that. Mhm. You
But
said, wait,
my
I hate to be racist, but I know you'll never live around black people. You don't like black people. You said that before,
stop.
but you know, but your family's black, right?
We're gonna ignore Charles with that one. Stop.
I got it on video, but anyway, your family's black, right?
Yes, my family's black.
Did they
But
did they get the shot?
so
No, that's
yes,
what I'm asking because
yes,
oh, because
99.9% of my family got the shot. And not only did they get the shot, but my parents, who are older, were terrified. And so, of course, my daughters, who are really close to them, didn't get to go visit them because they didn't have the shot. And then, even as time went on and they did, go,
because who did? I thought you just said they got the shot. Who
my
didn't have the shot?
kids weren't
Oh,
vaccinated.
gotcha,
So
gotcha,
they
gotcha,
couldn't
gotcha.
visit their
They got that.
grandparents
Right,
because
right,
they
right.
weren't vaccinated. So then,
Mhm.
after some time, and my parents got more comfortable
It
and they
wasn't
let them
them.
come, no,
Mhm.
my parents actually threatened to vaccinate my children while they were
They
Wait, did they
might
there
have like
have.
they
visiting
have a
them.
kid at home or something?
No, they were like, we're gonna take him and go get. I
Or
was like,
drag
Come
them
on,
no,
into the
if they live
you're
in
doctor?
a if they live in a black neighborhood, there's probably a van outside. They had mobile vaccination units. They put one in front of my kid's school when school opened back up.
not. But when I was watching Natalia's video, there was a little boy, and he said something to the effect of because his playground was gone, that he might as well, just die or give up. Or remember that? I was just like, oh, that was so
Where was
heartbreaking.
he, Natalia? Because I
It
know in
was
New York they took the rims down or put padlocks on them.
This is Tracy Hogue, who's now at the FDA, actually. She was recounting that she picked up her son at school or he couldn't go to school or something. He was 8 years old and he said he didn't feel like there was anything left for him to live for.
Wow.
Yeah, and then um, after everybody went back, I taught at a homeschool co-op. So I taught English. About 8 or 9 kids would come twice a week, and I would, teach them English. And so I remember this little girl, she always wore her mask, and she used to ask me, she said, Miss Christie, if I take my mask off, will you tell my mom? And I'm like, well, I'm not going to lie to her if she asks, were you wearing it? But I don't care, but I'm not going to lie to her, if she asks. And she's all, well, my mom said that I am going to kill my grandma if I don't wear my mask. And so it's just like the pressure that
Mm,
we put
yeah.
on these like poor kids is what I was what I was thinking as I was watching the film, like how bad it must have been, in places that were really locked down, for the children.
And Christy, you could never be an actual public school teacher because you part of their charter now is to lie to the parents. So you failed at your mission. You mean you wouldn't lie? You're supposed to. So okay, let's be
One
fair.
of the things about
You
this, since
wouldn't
we've all
lie
been
if
in
they said
leadership
that they
roles,
wanted to
just
take off a
the thing
mask,
that's so crazy
but you
about
would
this is that we
lie
could have
if
just
they
gone the
said that
other
they
way,
wanted
like protect the
a
old
gender
people.
thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm sorry, you guys were kind of crossing a
Oh, I'm
little bit.
sorry.
No, yeah.
Go ahead, Will.
No, yeah, Charles was the guy who should have been talking, but no, I just said like it was one sentence. Like the thing that's so crazy about this, like we've all been leaders. Like all we had to do was take this in the other direction, like the Swedes and the Japanese people did. Like all this kill the grandmother stuff. Like why not put 2 masks on Granny? Like I remember the first time I looked at the data on COVID risk for kids under 10, and it was like 1 in 25 million. One of you guys might correct me, but something very close to that was the risk. And you realize that all of this hysteria that's being pumped into these kids, which has all these devastating effects. I mean, youth suicide, so on. Every prom in the country was canceled for at least 1 year, etc. That was totally unnecessary. If you really just targeted, for example, retirement homes, that was one of the things, Natalia, that was one of the things with de Blasio, right? That
Cuomo.
this
Cuomo.
Cuomo, yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry,
Yeah.
wrong corrupt Italian New Yorker. But like
You get them mixed up.
yeah, they all look alike. But I mean, like the big
Yeah.
guys. But it's really isn't funny at all, though. I mean, they were taking these patients that had gotten COVID, and I find this difficult to imagine, but they were just putting them back into general population in these elder facilities, and something like half of New York's death toll came from that. So when you
Right.
see these incredible figures, like, so we did lose 1 million people to COVID over 5 to 6 years now. It was something like the 5th leading cause of death in the country, but the average age of those people, even now, even post-vax, was 68. So
Right.
you could have done a lot by targeting at the upper end, just shutting
Well,
up with all this stuff about kids. That's all you had to do.
Well, but yes, you could have, but you have to remember who was driving all of this. And as
Trump.
as the film explains, the teachers unions ended up getting $189.5 billion to reopen the schools. This was an extortion program. It worked This was not a bug. This was the way it was meant to be. It was a feature, right? The other thing is that I think we really started to live in a very numerator-driven kind of society. Like everything was a numerator. There's no denominator, and we're being taught that like context doesn't matter. And if we had at least like looked at that, people like Jay Bhattacharya, the Great Barrington Declaration, they weren't inventing the wheel. They were just bringing forward the pandemic playbook that actually was being used and was supposed to be used in this situation.
Mm-hmm. So that leads to, Will was talking about leaders, and that leads to the important question I think we need to spend time on. So you make this film, and it's important that people start doing this. Jay, as you mentioned, has spoken before Congress and talked about this. We had an episode that was removed from YouTube because at the time it was funny how they did it. So they took it down because there was false information. It was with Dr. Peter McCullough, and then when everything went by, they just posted it but it backdated. It still posted like it was 3 years old, and it was just okay. Nobody said anything. So it's good that the people are talking and they're saving stuff, Robert Malone, everyone else. But at the same time, no one's really taking an account, right? They never have to apologize. They never have to admit they're wrong. I mean, the right's always like, I want somebody to go to jail, whether that happens or not. It's the fact that we don't learn from it. We don't change our processes. We don't change the CDC. What few changes Trump is trying to make, they deem racist, leaves us vulnerable, it's going to do all these other things. So why wouldn't they continue to do this? But it's not this is the topic here, but it's no different than the gender thing. What's the other thing in New York? We put right before gender, we were pushing against, meritocracy. Like you can't just teach people to read and write. What the hell is that? You can't do that. I'm going back to Wilhelm again, but his parting shot for the schools was to eliminate the test for specialized schools because in his own words, go look up the New York Times article, he needed to desegregate the schools. We're all normal, intelligent people here. If I told you a school needed to be desegregated, wouldn't you assume, Christy, that it was majority white? Whether it's
Yep.
right or wrong, but isn't that what you were saying? You know, these schools were not majority white. They were not. They were majority Asian,
Mm.
right? So because they
The-
didn't have
the
a high
new
percentage of
white.
black students, right? They're white
The
adjacent.
golden white.
Right.
Right.
Model
So
minority.
so the problem here, Natalya, speak to how it's important, why it's important to spread the film and to watch the film, but you're documenting all of these things that happen, and it's clear. And Christy was moved by the stories of the parents, and I get that. I'm not knocking the parents. I'm not knocking you, Natalya. But nothing's happening to the people who did it. Cuomo ran for mayor,
Fauci's walking around.
right? These Fauci's just, I mean, they're
He
writing
lost to a
books. I mean,
12-year-old
okay,
communist, though. I mean, people
okay,
haven't
to be
totally
fair,
forgotten.
but to be fair, they took Cuomo's Emmy. He doesn't have an Emmy anymore.
Oh my
But other
God.
than that, when are we going to get when are we going to get Fauci, Dr. Briggs, to say we were wrong? Now he did say, but not because he was forced to. Oh, we made that 6 feet stuff up. But we did it for you. We did it for you.
Right, the noble lie. Yes. Um, well, but I mean, let's remember Fauci did this before with AIDS and AZT. He really mismanaged AIDS. So as a result, for a reward, he was given
Fell
this
up.
pandemic. He fell up. Yes,
He
exactly.
ran the same play, safe and effective.
Yeah.
Sounds
Yeah,
like
no, so
government.
there's not going to be any accountability. I mean, you were asking about the film. I mean, there are two different reasons why the film is important. One is because no one's telling these stories. We did about over 3.5 years, we did almost 60 interviews around the country, and I have far more material that can fit in a 1 hour and 9 minute film. In fact, I'd like to create a digital museum with bigger portions of those interviews and more of the stories. But also, I think the film's one of the more important things that we cover in the film is an interview with Martin Gurry, who you should invite to this podcast. I think he'd be a fantastic guest. He was a former CIA media analyst and is a contributor to the Free Press and wrote a book called The Revolt of the Public. And he predicted Trump's rise and the decline of legacy media. And he talks about propaganda. He's a Cuban refugee. He came here when he was 10, so he really knows a lot about the, Soviet and Cuban Marxist propaganda. And he talks about how all of these, messages that were coming at us were all the same thing. They were packaged differently. You had different spokespeople. And in fact, I just saw, this is somewhat tangential, but I think it's actually really important. I saw Coleman Hughes talking about the two Nick Fuenteses today on this podcast that he did. I think everybody should watch it. It's 18 minutes, well worth your time. But he talks about the different Nick Fuentes and how how Nick Fuentes interviews in like mainstream media with like a Tucker Carlson versus his own podcast. And it's completely different language, different markets. And if you talk to people about Nick Fuentes, the Nazi, the ones who are watching him on the Tucker Carlson show are like, oh, I didn't see that. He says he's, America first and, Catholic country, blah, blah, blah. But if you watch his show, he's saying, oh, I hate women, blacks, and Jews. They should all die. But he's not saying the same thing in both media. And the same thing with the teachers unions, Randy Weingarten. If you watch the film at the beginning, she's talking to her fellow NGO activists, and they're talking about reshaping society. They're not worried about the virus. They're seeing the virus as an opportunity. You have Jane Fonda on that call as well, who said COVID is God's gift to the left. She was right. It was. It was a great gift. Now, when Randy's talking to people, to parents, and she's on, MSNBC with Chris Hayes, she's saying, the epidemiologists have said we have to close schools. We're so scared. We're so worried about you. Those are two different Randys. Like they're not the same thing. And unless we understand who these charlatans are and the Machiavellian-esque personalities that we're dealing with, we're not going to be able to understand what's happening next.
I want to ask you a follow-up question about some of the other stuff you're doing besides the film. So before I do it, I don't want to allow Christy, Brooks, or Will to say anything else about the film 15 Days. Anything to add? Christy's like, those poor kids.
I think one of the things that you touched on that I think is really important is so many of of the big players during COVID were duplicitous in that they were mouthing the narrative and taking advantage of opportunities, whether you're talking about Weingarten reshaping society from a pedagogical standpoint, or the essential and non-essential, which was a
Ooh.
huge wealth transfer to
Mm.
the big companies, and the mom and pops and the small businesses
Yeah.
took a huge hit. And this is really centralizing power in a handful of companies and the state. And when that gets too close and touches in a corporatist sense, like that, there goes your country.
Gavin Newsom at the French Laundry.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, the movie itself I enjoyed good. I mean, I don't have any in-depth comments beyond what you've said. I would say one thing, Charles, in terms of what you just said, and Natalia, what you said as well about like the two Nick Fuentes is, I mean, the term for that in Arabic, I might be mispronouncing it, is takia. It's just
Yeah.
lying, bullshitting strategically. And I think we're seeing this more and more in politics. Maybe that is because the world's getting a little more global. The Russians call it maskirovka. But a lot of people are sort of two-faced men, depending on who they're talking to at any given time. And I think people need to be really aware of that. With Fuentes, it's really, really glaring. And by the way, in like the Western Anglo tradition, historically, I mean, bluntly, a white tradition, mostly Black Americans as well, but there's always been a real taboo against kind of doing that, like being two-faced, Janus-faced, totally different. In a lot of societies, that's just seen as being smart. That's just seen as being strategic, being part of competition. I mean, Fuentes on his podcast once did a 40-minute Holocaust analogy centered around cookies, where he argued that there weren't enough. I mean, you could Google Fuentes cookie Holocaust analogy, but it's legitimately pretty disgusting. He goes through how there weren't enough ovens in Germany or Poland or whatever to kill all the Jews. And he keeps laughing and going, haha, this crazy cookie analogy. So when Tucker Carlson says, well, I don't really know, and I like some of the things Tucker's done, but when he says, well, I don't really know what you've said that's supposed to be so controversial, I mean, there's an episode where Nick Fuentes says, I want my followers to say, I will kill, rape, and die for Nick Fuentes. So for a lot of these people, and this is true for Muslim activists coming into America, this is true for the eco-terrorist boys. For a lot of these people, if you just go on a real search engine and pull up their name, you'll find what they actually think. And it's important to take a look at that.
Right, right.
Again.
Natalia, I want to end with talking about your next film, Restore Childhood, what that is about, what you do, and anything else you want to promote, point out, or you think we've missed.
Oh, thanks. Well, first of all, this is great. The great conversation. I always love talking to you, Charles, and your co-hosts here too. Restore Childhood was founded during COVID restrictions during the pandemic and the school closures and then the masks. And, you know, we've done a bunch of different media campaigns, one called I Am an Anti-Masker, where we interviewed people who really suffered with masks. I know that for most of the country at this point, that's a non-issue, but actually I heard from a friend up in the Bay Area and they still have a mask mandate indoors from like December to March every year. So like the tyranny just hasn't ended. Like this is a lot of times people talk about the film, they talk about the masks, they talk about it in past tense. But so much of this is still very current, even though, you know, in March of 26, we'll be commemorating 6 years since the schools closed down and, you know, the pandemic started. So that's the kind of thing that we're working towards in Restore Childhood, trying to make sure that people don't forget the history, because then, of course, you know, we don't build the literacy, and that's the most important thing. And then the other film I've been working on that you were gracious enough to appear in, that's not quite done yet, is about Maud Marin, who's a friend of mine and a New York City DA candidate who unfortunately just lost to Alvin Bragg, and looking at what it means to be politically homeless, because she ran as a Republican and she's a former Bernie Sanders supporting Democrat. So what it means to run as a politically homeless person in a city like New York.
Okay. Yeah, I don't know. It's like I think that, I mean, it's good, it's important, hopefully. Oh, yeah, real quick. you're doing a tour. How else do people see the movie? I know you had it out there for free on Twitter for a while. Where do they go to see it now?
It's still on Twitter for a few more days, but really if they go to 15daysfilm.com, they can see, how to find it. We have DVDs, digital downloads, and it'll be streaming on major streaming platforms, hopefully by the beginning of next year.
Oh, okay. Yeah, so you definitely want to check it out. It's gonna take you back. I know I called Natalia while I was watching it to recount a story. I told her that I don't know if I've mentioned this before. The lines blur. You don't remember whether you said it all while it was recorded, but my son was playing and fell and bit through his chin. And this is at the time in New York when they were like, remember, if you remember this part, we talked about all the other, but we talked about the riots, talked about this, but you remember the hospitals were overrun, right? And it was partially true, but it's situational. It was never all blanket. But the news was that all the hospitals were overrun. They had to limit who can go in. They were packing up body bags, all this other stuff. And so I'm freaking out, obviously, because he's hurt, but also I don't want to go to the hospital. So I go to an urgent care first. It was down the street, but they couldn't stop the bleeding. So it was like, we can't stop the bleeding. You got to go to the hospital. So we're freaking out, whatever. It was like, oh, what is that going to be like? How long is the wait or what's the protocol's going to be? So it's COVID, right? So we show up and they were only let one person in, so I couldn't go in. My wife got there before me, so they wouldn't let me in. So they go in and I'm standing outside looking in. And on the one side, it's 2 entrances. It's a big hospital. On one side, it's almost like the staff is shift change. So the staff's walking in and out. And it's almost like the videos you all are aware of with them dancing and it's the whole line. Go to the emergency room. My wife took the picture and sent it to me. She's the only person in the emergency room. The whole hospital's empty. Nobody's there. But I can't go in because, you got to keep the distance. But her and my son are the only ones in there. So that was the one thing, So when you watch the movie, you're going to remember, you're going to think, where was my kid? Whether you're like Christy and Will, and you're in places that weren't as closed, or if you're someplace where it's shut down, you're like, yeah, I remember that happened to me. And my kid felt the same thing. I remember once, I didn't mention this one to you, my son, so early on, I straightened him out quick, but early on, because they're feeding the narrative, the same thing the teachers union is doing is passing down. He's in kindergarten, and he walked home. Now, granted, I lived a block from the school. He walked home like this because he didn't have a mask. He was outside, and so he was going to protect himself by putting his hand over his mouth. I was like, you fool, get that head off of your face. I mean, if you're gonna die, you're still gonna die. It's not like this is gonna keep the really. But yeah, it's because of what they're telling him at school every day. So you're gonna watch this film and you're gonna think about all that. And you're gonna get mad again that stuff happened, and then you're gonna feel better about Natalya and the way they did the film and what they're doing and standing up. Then you're gonna get mad again because nothing's gonna happen to these horrible, horrible people. But maybe the next time something happened, at least they will do the same thing, but we'll all be smarter. Final words, Wilfred Reilly.
I mean, I think my final word would just be, well, first of all, Natalya, thank you for coming on. Enjoyed talking to you. Enjoyed talking to the hosts on the panel as always. My final word, I guess, would just be don't fall easily victim to hysteria. We've seen this not just with COVID, but with virtually, and Brooks has done some great writing about this on his Substack, the Daedalus thread. Charles, Christy have talked about it really well in their public media appearances. But I mean, when you look at everything from the transgender question to the idea that there's a coming race war in the USA, to all this stuff on Twitter with people panicking each other, turns out they're all from India and Russia and so on. Like very often people will say things that sound absolutely hysterical, absolutely terrifying. I mean, as an investor, we're on peak oil number 12 right now, right? We're going to run out of resources. The world's going to end. We're all going to be riding mules again. It almost never happens. Keep calm. If you think there's going to be a disease crisis next time, stay at home for 10 days, maybe for real. Don't put the weak at risk, but just understand that this has been threatened over and over and over and over and over and over again. Unless you're a soldier on a battlefield, it almost, perhaps a mother in labor, it almost never comes true. So just stop giving in to the constant panic. You walk by 100 white guys, 100 black guys, 100 young women every day. You somehow have managed to live to this point. That probably indicates there's something in reality that's a lot more honest and valid than what you're hearing from our media. So keep that in mind.
Brooks Crenshaw.
Yes, sir. So a through line here that I've heard tonight, and something Will just touched on, which is lying in other cultures is often considered being smart. And yes, we call it third world corruption. And, the West has largely had a pretty good, what would you say, immune system to third world corruption. And I think we took a wrong turn with the idea of postmodernism that there's no such thing as objective truth. And the removal of the pursuit of objective truth as the paramount value descends every institution into a Soviet style power play, power structure, language game. And that's what we're seeing. And so I think one of the things that we really need to do is go back and reinstantiate the value of pursuit of objective truth as the paramount value in the West. Otherwise, we're going to be third world corrupt, just like the rest of the world.
Christy Kelly.
When you said there's no consequence for any of it, I think that really resonated with me because the consequence often is led by the media. But what happens when the media is the main one that's fueling it and that is lying to everybody and helping perpetuate, right, the big lie? And so as much as we want to say mainstream media is dead and we don't care, and it's really not. And I think unless the right figures out how to get control of the media and become, more of, unfortunately, the predominant media, we're just going to keep seeing this. And we saw this with Jake Tapper, because remember how much Jake Tapper really, he you're stealing my punchline, Charles.
I didn't say
Tapper
what it was about. It could have been a baking book. How to make the perfect
Tapper
apple
was
pie.
all in covering for Biden. Like, if you go back, you could do reel after reel. Oh, Biden is fine. Oh, Biden is smart. No, you guys are mean for talking about him because he stutters. And then when everything hit the fan, he just had amnesia and wrote a book about it, about how, oh, how dare he lie to us? And what? Lie to us? Like, you were the one. So I think until we get a hold of the media, the sane people, and unseat some of the power and stop lying to ourselves by saying mainstream media is dead, we're just going to keep seeing this over and over.
No knock to my good friend Will and Brooke, but that was beautiful, Christy. Very good. I'm glad we waited for you to actually speak and stop just going. I think I want to end by adding a little levity, and I want to say, I'm kind of a, amateur social scientist with the pros here. So I want to make my final thought as I look back on the COVID days and the craziness that happened, and do kind of a call out to the people watching and listening, so maybe they can help explain the one thing I don't understand. I understand the duplicity and the corruption. I understand stupidity. I understand the curve and the 15 days. You know what I don't understand? Why the blacks who wear masks, and especially who still wear masks, wear the mask when they're outside. And now Christy would know because she stays away from the blacks. But why they wear them as chin guards and they don't cover their mouth and nose? Don't act like you haven't seen it. Natalya, do not act like you haven't seen it. There's a bunch of black folks walking around the country with masks out here. And they're like, how you doing? I'm staying safe. So I want to know, as the movie and all of this conversation takes me back there, and I don't want to know why. Well, I'm not knocking you for wearing a mask. I just don't understand why you don't cover your nose and your mouth with the mask. That's all I got. If I can learn that, maybe it'll calm some of my anger over no accountability for the people. Natalya, as the guest, you get the last word. What would you like to leave us with?
I think everyone should go and spend time with their grandparents. If they've got grandparents, or try all the
If Cuomo didn't kill them.
Well, I mean, look, the grandparents are the repositories of, information, context, truth. I think that many of our problems would be solved if we could live in multi-generational households again. And that's where I think we should be focused, not these poor kids who are staring into phones and have lost the sense of the plot. Like, there's no plot. Like, oh my God, like a girl going through puberty, not liking her breasts. I'm sure if she talked to her grandma, she'd probably tell her that she went through the same thing. Like, we need to be able to go back to ancestral knowledge and forget about the experts, like somebody here said.
All right. She is Natalya Murakhver, from Restore Childhood and the creator of the film 15 Days. Go check it out. For the whole crew, thank you for joining us, and thank you all for watching and listening however you get your Cut the Bull. As long as you get the bull cut, we don't care how you get it cut.
I got a country to say. Patriot J, I'm saving the day. Patriot J, I'm saving the day from you commies who lame. No, you can't fuck with me. I got a country to say. God bless the US of A. Land of the free and the home of the brave. God get all of the praise. I got a country to say, cause I'm Patriot J and I'm saving the day.